All right, so we have a small group, so I'm going to get us started, and I think we'll do this a little differently than we had sort of planned because we have such an intimate conversation, which is it's going to be different, but I think it's going to be good. So welcome. This is expanding understanding of employees' life challenges and structural barriers through surveys. Welcome. I'm Matt Bruce. Oh, we have more people coming in now, so this is great. This is understanding employees through surveys. That's what you signed up for, that you're in the right place. I'm Matt Bruce. I'm Executive Director of the Chicagoland Workforce Funder Alliance. We're one of the partners putting this thing together. Welcome to everyone. I want to welcome our two panelists in particular, Kirsten Gracia with Northwestern Medicine and Ashley Bodwin with IMEC, which is the Illinois Manufacturing Excellence Center, and they'll both talk a lot more about their organizations, what they do. Just a couple of housekeeping things at the top. It's a pretty straightforward approach we'll do with these breakouts. We'll hear from each of the panelists who have had experience either with their own company or with multiple companies, in Ashley's case, of doing surveys and all that they encountered through that. We'll then have time for Q&A and discussion. And you can put your questions in the chat at any time, even while the panelists are talking, and we'll get to them. But then when we get to the Q&A portion, we ask that people use the raise the hand feature, and that'll put you to the top of the queue, and we'll call people, and you can unmute in that way when we get to the Q&A. Just also basic housekeeping: if you can keep yourself on mute if you're not talking. I'm going to put myself on mute in just a minute, and we'll get started. So first, I'm going to turn over to Kirsten to talk about the experience at Northwestern Medicine on surveys. Kirsten, you want to take it away?
All right. Yeah, thank you. Let me share my screen here. All right. Is everyone able to see? Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much. As was mentioned, my name is Kirsten Gracia, and I'm a Director of Human Resources for Northwestern Medicine. And in specific today, wanted to share some of the work that we did with surveys to better understand structural barriers to growth and development in our organization. So I'd like to start by giving a little bit of background to how this work kicked off for us, and it gives a little more insight into the design of our surveys, specifically the population that we surveyed. As part of our involvement in the Chicago HEAL initiative, in which, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, it's the Hospital Engagement Action and Leadership Initiative, which involves a variety of health systems throughout the Chicagoland area, all with the joint goal of increasing the workforce commitment to reduce economic hardship. As part of that initiative, it focuses on supporting specifically 18 Chicago neighborhoods that rank the highest in both social vulnerability and years of potential life loss from gun deaths. So our surveys specifically targeted those HEAL zip codes within our own workforce. So to give that insight is helpful to understand, because one of the things we struggled with was a relatively small N size in participation, but it was intentional and it was part of our pilot and the design of the survey. So some of the participation requests for this pilot, and it was a pilot throughout our fiscal year of 21, were fourfold. So two of them were surveys. One was a focus group, and then the other was a survey that was geared towards our new hires. And then we had two other elements of this as part of this key initiative that weren't necessarily surveys, but it was helpful in helping people understand better equitable hiring practices, so through a behavioral interviewing class and then also an implicit bias workshop. The main goal of the overall program, including the focus group and the new hire survey, was to help us as an organization understand what structural elements may be impacting someone's ability to leverage the development opportunities that we have, but also to get a sense of the effectiveness of those programs as it relates to retention and development of the population. So to talk a little bit more specifically about the focus group, this was geared at our learning and development programs You'll see it's called the NM Academy Certificate Program. And that's essentially the learning and development arm of our organization. And so the focus group was geared at understanding how we could better elevate the skill sets and advance the careers of people within our pilot group. One of the opportunities we knew that existed going into this was that our programs were heavily utilized by leadership and our exempt and non-clinical roles. And we wanted to make sure that we were able to understand what barriers existed to other groups and populations within the workforce participating in our programs. Some of the key questions that we asked were, what sorts of development are meaningful to you, both as a person and based upon your role? What keeps you or blocks you from utilizing current resources? And what learning formats were most desirable? And then lastly, what organizational and or direct leader support was needed? These were a virtual brainstorming meeting because they did occur during COVID. So originally were intended to be in person, but they ended up being virtual. And the design was about 60 minutes and it included both leaders and staff. One of the key takeaways that we learned as part of the focus group was that the job design to most of the positions that we wanted to promote utilization of these particular programs was just not conducive to taking time out of their job to participate. So for our exempt and our leadership populations, a lot of them had built-in downtime or they had time outside of work to complete the courses. But for our roles that are more structured and on the floor with our patients, on the phone with our patients, they don't have that time away from their work day to actually participate. So that's one of the key barriers that we found through the Academy Certificate Program focus group. And then the other survey that we piloted as part of the initiative amongst our HEAL population was a new hire onboarding survey. Like many organizations, we struggle with first-year turnover, specifically for these populations. So we really wanted to get a better sense of what specifically was preventing this group from staying with us within the 90-day mark. So we did surveys at the 1 week, 30-day, and 90-day period. And we really wanted to get a sense of if the job met their expectations and was at all what they anticipated. And also if they felt supported, both from the organization, but from their direct leader, and just their overall sentiment about their environment. So we had them go through a list of emotions that they were feeling at each of these timeframes that ranged from excited and supported to unsure, frustrated, angry. And so we really got a sense of the emotional sense that people felt throughout our experience. The survey timeframe was the last quarter of our fiscal year, and that was specifically for the pilot. We have since expanded our pilot to other areas of the health system, and so we are continuing this work into fiscal year 22. I think we're excited to have more data and to see maybe how the greater health system and the expansion of the pilot compares to the small population that we've already worked with and that we've already surveyed. So that really wraps it up. I think that we're going to have time for questions after our next presenter. So I will unshare my screen and hand it over.
Great, thank you, Kirsten. I want to bring in Ashley with Illinois Manufacturing Excellence Center. I want to say at the top that actually we did have a manufacturing company lined up to be on the panel who had done the survey with their own employees, of course. And at the relatively last minute, that panelist couldn't be with us today. So Ashley graciously agreed to step in, and which is great. She can talk about that employer's experience, but she can also talk about some other manufacturers' experience as well, because this is one of the things that IMEC does is help manufacturers, small, medium manufacturers, really integrate their people practices into their process and product, as Ashley will talk about. So she's going to talk about that survey experience across multiple companies. So thank you, Ashley.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you for this opportunity so I can share information on such an important topic. Really quick, a little bit about me. As Matt mentioned, my name is Ashley Bedoin, and I'm a technical specialist for IMEC, so concentration in workforce development. Matt already mentioned, IMEC is a team of really individuals who are industry improvement specialists who really assist with the goal of igniting manufacturing excellence throughout the state of Illinois. And we assist primarily small to mid-sized manufacturing companies and really succeeding in looking at people, process, and products. So we like to take a holistic approach with looking at workforce improvements to operational improvements. What I would like to go over are some key insights about the topic of engagement. And again, as Matt mentioned, I am assisting and filling in from a client that we assist with. So I'm going to be providing some insight based upon their experience, as well as a few others throughout the state. And just for reference, company sizes really vary. And I would say anywhere from 20 employees up to 350 plus employees. So very, very critical. Looking at this information just at a very high level, I wanted to share how I have personally assisted companies on the topic of engagement with utilizing a survey tool. Also, why I like to encourage companies with focusing in on the topic of engagement, as well as really wrap up with what I have seen work well, and then also things that work well comes with challenges. So I wanted to touch a little bit upon that. So starting off with how I personally help companies, as well as some of my peers assist companies on the topic of engagement. About 6 years ago, we created an in-house engagement survey, and this was in a part of an initiative called Genesis Movement, and this was in a partnership with Matt Bruce and his team. We knew that there was a need with the people component of things and how critical and essential people are within a given company. So my experience is primarily with manufacturing companies, and we utilize a survey tool that has been vetted, and we really use this to gain insight about the employees and really their thoughts and feelings on the various topics of engagement. So it could be anything from workforce development in relation to growth and development, manager effectiveness, could be employee collaboration. And then of course we incorporate a few other questions, which I'll get into. I'm able to really help with the beginning stages of this deployment, and it's really looking at the engagement survey in a few different ways. When I assist companies with the engagement survey, I like to take a very structured approach. IMEC has a 7-step approach, and just speaking in general terms, hitting on some key points is it's important to start off with a project charter. So why are you completing the survey? Why do you want to focus in on the topic of engagement? And what's the outcome that you want to get from it? It's one thing to facilitate a survey and have it be deployed. It's a whole other thing to really take action upon it. And then another key step is looking at communication, creating a communication plan across various levels of the organization, as well as different touch points throughout the survey process and journey. The biggest topic that I want to get into based upon the 7-step approach is the actual survey itself, right? So the survey that we facilitate, and I would say regardless of industry, I've seen it work well in manufacturing, and it could be various industries where I have seen it be replicated, is somewhat similar to what was mentioned earlier. We take a quantitative approach as well as qualitative approach. The quantitative approach is a survey itself. So we have questions that are directly impacted toward engagement. And then we like to incorporate indirect topics, I would say, that impact engagement levels. So always encouraging net promoter score questions and things like that. The biggest thing that I have helped companies with is customizing the survey and customizing the survey process. So I wanted to get into just a few examples of how we customize the whole approach. So with the survey itself, just a specific example, there was a recent company that we assisted, and they were thinking about moving locations and then also adding on another location. And they were from a Chicago suburb, and they wanted to move to a pretty decent, I would say, different location about 45 to 50 minutes away. And this not only impacts the company itself and the business impacts the bottom line, but it absolutely impacts and can create change and distraction amongst employees, the workforce. So the specific company, they wanted to incorporate questions about travel, looking at distance preference, and just time that it would take overall, and possible disruptions with external factors. So it could be anything in relation to families. The specific company has a lot of younger people who have a little bit of, I would say, younger families to where there's childcare, anything like that they have to take care of. So they had questions such as that, gaining insight. They were able to really, I would say, reconfirm their thoughts on the topic. Another example in relation to survey customization is in relation to COVID. So COVID, we did a specific initiative, and this obtaining the survey through COVID, it's a COVID engagement survey, and we did a pulse survey. So a very abbreviated version of the engagement survey. And what was essential about this is we customized the survey to a certain extent based upon company needs and also what they were seeking that they wanted to take action on. And a few outcomes that we saw, for example, when this first happened, there was fear that individuals had about their safety, specifically in relation to health. So that looked at employers said, okay, well, we do have to add sanitation stations and we do have to provide masks because sometimes we have individuals who are unable to afford a whole box of masks throughout a given week or 2 weeks that they would have to utilize them for. Another one is, I would say, hands down from feedback from the COVID survey, is the impact and pressure that individuals have had because their significant others were unable to work. So they were the breadwinners. They had so much pressure on them and they knew that they couldn't stop working. So there was burnout that really occurred. Customization with the qualitative part, we looked at, for the qualitative portion, we also highly recommend focus group conversations. Focus group conversations, I always like to say, it truly tells the story of that quantitative data. And with the focus group conversations, we always like to connect survey topics, but then also customize the questions based upon the leadership's needs and wants. A few examples, something extremely relevant within manufacturing, and I would say many industries, is that retention. Retention has been difficult and continues to be difficult within this specific industry. And a few companies recently, they wanted me to incorporate topics and conversations on, well, why are people leaving? Why are we having so much difficulty with them staying a day, let alone trying to come back after their lunch break? So reasons for that, I would say it's a little bit sporadic. There's some consistency, and the consistency is when new hires are coming in, they're kind of thrown into work. So there's a lack of training and lack of being acclimated socially. Another one would be lack of working relationships. We know that we spend so much time working with our peers that if we don't have that foundational trust, that foundational relationship, it could be a struggle. And then I would say one of the biggest ones is that from the perception of employees about their peers as to why they leave is in regard to pay, unfortunately. And there are some people who I'll say, quote unquote, chasing or following higher paying jobs, even if it's $1 more, which when you think about it, that being taxed, it's not that much. So they're leaving for a specific reason, but then others are really leaving because they need to support their family, they're struggling. And I'm just amazed and just very, very excited, I would say, of how many companies are starting to create the wage ranges for specific jobs. So you're paying for the specific skill. And I will say from my own personal experience, we're starting to definitely make traction with manufacturing companies on that. And then, so a little bit about why I encourage companies to really hone in on looking at an engagement survey. Could be another tool that could be utilized throughout the year, is that you obtain this information from the entire workforce. It's one thing for a leadership team to have their own perceptions about what's working well and areas for improvement. It's a whole nother thing to get the perception of those who are performing a day-to-day jobs, if it's on the production floor, in the hospital, in the front office, anything like that. And I like to say that perceptions are facts. These facts are really relevant and extremely important for individuals. So obtaining their perception is critical to move forward. And I would say when you're looking at a survey tool, you're really uncovering more breadth and depth to be aware of. So you can get into both internal improvements. So it could be something such as providing professional development opportunities, creating more awareness on skill development and opportunities, as well as really gaining insight on external topics too. And like I mentioned earlier, we've gained topics from the COVID pulse surveys and how much that has impacted individuals that are coming into work. The other thing as to, I would say, why I encourage the topic is truly putting in the effort to capture the thoughts, could be through a survey, and following through. That's the biggest thing that I would say as a reason as to why I focus in on engagement, having that consistency on a given topic, because we know if you can make a difference to an individual, it's a cascade effect, and it's going to improve the bottom line of the organization as well as the given community. So if I can just take a few more minutes on looking at what goes well or what went well so far, and then also areas for opportunity with engagement surveys in general, and again, across industries. And I took note of these because they're pretty important. So things that are working well, bottom line is that companies are taking action. The biggest downfall of an engagement survey is that you utilize the individual's time and then also trust, and you can possibly be breaking trust if you don't do anything with the survey results. So things that have been working well is that people are taking action on it. Something else is that people are creating structure around engagement surveys. One of the biggest downfalls is that you have a survey, it's done every 12 to 18 months, and that's it. What I have seen companies do is that they form specific committees, cross-industry group that really hones in on, okay, well, what are our future steps? What can we do what can we do as we move forward? And then the last one is, I mentioned this, companies are creating wage bands or wage ranges, and they're truly paying for their skills. And I see more and more companies noting how critical employees are and that they can leave, they can go down the block or right next door. Challenges is that minimal action is done. So you could be breaking their trust, you can be allowing them to really leave the door. And then the last one that I have is, if you're creating customized survey questions out of curiosity, it doesn't work well. So creating questions where you can take action upon it, to where you can actually do something with it moving forward, because curiosity is a nice to have, but what does it do for your workforce?
That's great. Thank you, Ashley. So I encourage people to put questions in the chat, or there is if you go to the bottom of the screen, there's a reaction button. One of those reactions is to raise your hand. And so if you do that, then we'll call on you. You should take yourself off mute. But I'm going to ask a couple questions to get us going. Kirsten, I want you to talk more about one of the challenges you encountered, which is like response rate. And because it's, especially if you're going to try to uncover challenges that are outside the workplace or at the intersection of the workplace and the rest of the employee's life, that can be a challenge to bring that information out. So can you talk about that challenge that you faced? Also, what you're thinking about next time.
Sure. And so part of the reason actually that I think we had a big challenge with response rate is because a really large segment of the population that we intended to get feedback from didn't sit in front of a computer and didn't open a computer at all day long. So a lot of the roles were in our environmental services department, and they don't have a desktop that they use on a day-to-day basis. And in any given week, you may not even use a computer at all while at work. So that was a big barrier from an internal perspective and a structural barrier. So, we thought through some different solutions, like creating a QR code that employees could scan. They could do it on their phone. That was one of the things that we implemented. We also had to really get leaders and managers to promote it. which I think has its pros and cons, because I think sometimes if it's over promoted at the leader level, it may feel disingenuous, or like we're pushing too hard to try to get this information. And like Ashley said, then what if we don't see the action that comes out from it? But we did try to make it more organic in the way that it was promoted. And then the other population that took the survey, or we sent the survey to, they were in front of a computer on a pretty consistent basis. One of the struggles we realized after probing a little bit more is that due to all the recent emails that we had from our IT department about phishing, they thought that the survey was a phishing attempt. So we branded the survey email a little bit differently, and that was another thing that we did. And then I think just in general, expanding our N size, it was relatively small, intentionally, but to really get that participation, the numbers that we see to really have statistically valid trends, we have to increase the N size altogether. So, those are some of the challenges that we faced early on. We have seen numbers pick up now that we're past the pilot, and we're hoping that we'll see those numbers pick up.
That's great. And one of the most important things seems to be your persistence. You're not giving up. You're gonna keep at it.
You got it.
I see Jason, you have your hand raised. You want to take yourself off mute, please?
Yeah, happy to. So one of the questions that I had was, one of the last surveys that we did, we asked obviously some different demographic questions. That way, as we're surveying the entire firm, we can start to figure out other trends at some of the staff levels versus the executive levels. Are they in certain geographies? Are they in certain business units? The challenge that we ran into with that is, when people started saying, I'm a manager in the Minneapolis office, female, they quickly kind of got down to, I'm a population of one, and therefore this is no longer anonymous. So the concern was, do I really want to fill out the demographics? How do I know that this makes it anonymous? The flip side is, if we don't ask that, then all the results kind of get piled into one big group, and it's a little bit harder to figure out other pockets of challenges or engagement differences. So curious how you've thought about that in the past.
Thank you, Jason. I should ask, can you also share your company or organization, just the name?
Yeah, I'm with River on Consulting.
That's a great question. I'm interested to see how the panelists respond. You asked a hard one.
Actually,
I can definitely go first. It's a little bit scary based on your comment, because are you with me while I'm working with some of the companies that I assist with? Because, for example, I have someone previously stated, well, I'm the only female on second shift who is a welder, and they're going to know who I am. So what we like to do is we have demographic questions, and that's where we customize it. We customize the response options to where the categories or buckets are specific enough, but they're general to where people feel comfortable. And we like to dissect the data, at least if there's at least 5 or more people per group. And it's all about trust at that point. When identifying specific pockets, my perception is, when I think of a survey, you're looking at a larger team rather than an individual. So that's why I like to say and encourage, go beyond just a survey. So to really pinpoint individuals' perceptions and feelings, I like to think of incorporating stay interviews throughout the engagement survey process, as well as it could be pulse surveys within a specific department or anything like that. So possibly utilizing additional tools to dig a little bit deeper.
Yeah, and I would say, because we've done most of our survey administration through a vendor, we're able to pull in most of that demographic data from our HRMS. So we're not asking the question and not giving that perception that we're trying to target a specific population. And then further, the vendor has restricted the responses based upon N size to be above a certain amount to any given leader. So they also can't try to determine, who said what based upon the amount of responses that they're seeing. We have gone back and forth over the years, and this is more specific to our engagement or experience surveys than it is the surveys that I just talked about, on what the right N size is. So is it 5 or more? Is it 3 or more? Is it 8 or more? And I think, it just depends upon the department. And as we've grown as an organization, we now have a workforce of 35,000 people. We've realized that we, probably need to start to expand that maybe a little bit more.
Great. I'm glad you were here to answer that. Karen, you want to take yourself off mute? Give your name and organization, of course.
Sure, thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. Karen Norrington Reeves, CEO, Chicago Cook Workforce Partnership. So one of the things that I find with surveys is that it reveals unexpected information. And Kirsten, as you were talking about your survey and that the issue around accessibility and that a significant number of the folks were actually in your environmental services department, it just made me think, since you're talking about equity and talking about addressing those issues within the organization, did that catch you all off guard? Like, how did you respond to the fact that the majority of the folks from those communities in your company were in, what is essentially a lower level entry level position? And what, if any, plans? I'm curious to know what your response is and sort of what the plan is for creating greater diversity in other roles going forward.
Yeah, I don't know that element in specific took us by surprise, because we've been doing surveys for years, primarily our engagement survey. This was a different survey, and I think it created even a greater emphasis around the fact that the majority of our healed populations were within those jobs, and that's the part I think that we're focusing on now as an organization. I think the thing we're trying to think about is job design, and by the nature of that work, when there is no dedicated time to be on a computer, even reading emails, organizational announcements and communications, there's more of a disconnect to what's going on culturally outside of your work and outside of your department. So one of the things we're trying to look at is the makeup of our jobs and how we have a more well-rounded job that is just not only working exclusively environmental services, but allows sometimes to be on a computer, to read emails, to do learning and development types of initiatives. And the other thing that actually came out of that was, external to NM, a lot of these people, because the programs are available, most of them virtually and accessible at any time. Some of them are not. Some of them are dedicated in-person class times. But this, the same population doesn't necessarily have time outside of work either, whether it be childcare, elder care, second job, whatever it might be. So that was a barrier as well. So yeah, certainly something that we're thinking about. We think that kind of reconfiguring the job and working with leaders to understand how their productivity is measured, but how they build in time to the people's day outside of that productivity measurement is something that we're trying to think about right now.
I was to ask Ashley, does that make you want to chime in too? Because that sounds a lot like one of the positives that you were mentioning, which is how the survey can then lead to the employer and insights from that making real change. What Kirsten's talking about, changing job design, that's real change by the employer. It's a real response to what they're learning.
Yes, and we've seen, so from what I've personally seen, I have seen some job design specifically out on the manufacturing floor, more so entry-level positions, and then also creating career path opportunities. So employers are starting to recognize and acknowledge that, okay, well, you can go beyond just an entry-level position, and here are the specific tiers, here's a specific path that you can take as an individual. So we've seen a handful of those opportunities starting to really grow and evolve.
That's great. Well, thank you so much. We have our 2-minute warning, so that's my cue to bring us to a wrap. I want to thank all the attendees for being here. I want to thank the panelists for presenting. A couple of housekeeping things for the rest of the showcase. So we should all be whisked back to the main room, and then we will go through the experience again where they will talk about the second set of panels, and you can choose the panel to go into. Speaking of surveys though, and if you choose not to go to the next part, you will get an email with a follow-up survey about this whole showcase, and that's like very valuable, and we intend to learn and respond to it. So thank you all for being here.